The dust settled around the wagon wheels as Magnolia pressed her hand against her lower belly, feeling the familiar ache of emptiness there. 3 days on the trail from Kansas City, and she still couldn't believe she'd actually left. Left Thomas. Left the modest house they'd shared for 7 years. Left behind the pitying glances of neighbors who watched her waistline remain stubbornly flat, while every other woman in their community seemed to swell with new life as regularly as the seasons. Changed. The wagon train had stopped for the night near a creek, and Magnolia climbed down stiffly, her bones protesting the endless jostling. She was 32 years old, and sometimes she felt ancient. She'd joined this group of settlers heading west, with nothing but her few possessions, her seamstress skills, and a determination to reinvent herself somewhere nobody knew her story. "You'll want to fetch water before dark," called Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman traveling with her husband and 5 children. 5 living children, that is. She'd mentioned losing 2 others in infancy, but still she had 3 more than Magnolia had ever managed to conceive. The woman wasn't unkind, just matter-of-fact in that way people who'd never truly suffered could be. Magnolia took her bucket and headed toward the creek, grateful for a moment alone. The evening air was cooling and the sky stretched vast and pink above her. This was what she'd wanted: space, possibility, a landscape as open as the future she hoped to build. She'd heard that in California a skilled seamstress could make good money. She'd heard that in the West a person's past didn't matter as much as their capabilities. She'd heard that starting over was possible. She was kneeling by the creek, watching the water rush clear and cold over smooth stones, when she heard the horse approaching. Magnolia looked up to see a rider silhouetted against the setting sun, leading a pack mule behind him. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent more time in a saddle than in a chair, and as he drew closer, she could make out a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, sandy hair that needed cutting, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. "Evening," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was low and pleasant, with a slight drawl that placed him from somewhere south. "Saw your train making camp. You folks heading to California?" "That's right," Magnolia said, standing and brushing off her skirt. She was suddenly aware of how travel-worn she must look, how the dust clung to her dark skin and her clothes, how her hair had escaped its pins in wild tendrils. "Long journey still ahead of you?" the cowboy said, dismounting. His horse moved. "To the creek to drink," and he let the reins drop loose, trusting the animal to stay close. "Name's Nathaniel Garrett, but most folks call me Nate. I run cattle through these parts. Have a cabin about 5 miles north of here." "Magnolia Reed," she offered, then hesitated before adding, "I'm traveling alone." She saw something flicker in his expression, not pity exactly, but perhaps understanding. He nodded once, then knelt beside the creek to fill his own canteen. "Traveling alone takes courage," he said, "especially for a woman. Especially for a black woman heading west." His directness surprised her. Most white folks danced around her. Race pretended not to notice while their eyes told a different story. "I'm not without courage," she said quietly, "just without certain other things." Nate looked at her then, really looked, and Magnolia had the strange sense that he saw her, not just the surface, but something deeper. "We're all without certain things," he said. "That's what makes us human. It's what we do with what we do have that matters." He stood, and for a moment they simply regarded each other in the fading light. "Your wagon train," he said finally. "I noticed you're short on scouts. This territory can be tricky. There's a better pass about a day west of here that'll save you time and trouble, but you'll need someone who knows it to guide you through. I could ride with you for a spell if your wagon master's agreeable." "That's kind of you," Magnolia said, surprised by the offer. "Not kindness, practicality. I'm heading that direction anyway. Got business in Sacramento come fall. Might as well travel with company." He smiled then, just a slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. Besides, I could use a good meal that isn't my own cooking. I suspect a camp full of families will have better fare than beans and hardtack." Magnolia found herself smiling back. "I suspect you're right." She watched as he swung back into his saddle with fluid grace. "I'll speak with your wagon master in the morning," he said. "Until then, Miss Reed, you take care. And you might want to let folks know there's bear sign about a mile upstream. Nothing to worry about if you're sensible, but good to be aware." He touched his hat again and rode off toward a copse of trees where he'd apparently made his own camp, leaving Magnolia standing by the creek with her bucket, wondering at the strange encounter. That night, she lay in her bedroll under the wagon, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down around her. Children's voices fading to silence, men talking in low tones around the fire. Mrs. Henderson's baby crying briefly before finding comfort at her mother's breast. Once, those sounds would have filled Magnolia with such fierce longing that she'd have wept into her blankets. Now, she felt something different. Not quite peace, but perhaps acceptance. Perhaps the beginning of release. She thought about the cowboy, Nathaniel Garrett. There'd been something in his eyes when he'd spoken about being without things. A shadow of loss that matched her own. She wondered what he lacked, what emptiness he carried, what had brought a man who clearly valued solitude to offer his company to a wagon train full of strangers. In the morning, true to his word, Nate appeared at their camp, just as breakfast was being cleared away. He spoke with Mr. Peterson, the wagon master, showing him a rough map he'd sketched of the terrain ahead. Magnolia watched from a distance, as the older man nodded, asked questions, and finally shook Nate's hand. They had themselves a guide. For the next week, Nate rode scout for the train, ranging ahead to check the trail, falling back to help when wagons struggled over rough ground, and making himself useful in a dozen quiet ways. He had a gentle manner, with the children, who quickly lost their shyness around him, and a respectful distance with the women that made even the most protective husbands relax. With Magnolia, he was simply easy. He'd ride alongside her wagon sometimes, talking about the land they passed through, the animals they might see, the weather patterns in the mountains ahead. He never asked about her past or why she was traveling, alone, and she appreciated that more than she could say. In turn, she didn't pry into his life, though she learned things anyway through simple observation and casual conversation. He'd had a wife once. She caught that in an offhand comment about someone who used to tell me I was too stubborn for my own good. He'd lost family in the war. She heard it in the way his voice went flat when someone mentioned battles in Virginia. He'd been drifting for years, working cattle drives, taking odd jobs, moving from place to place like a man who couldn't quite figure out where he belonged. "You ever think about settling somewhere?" she asked him one evening as they sat by the fire after most folks had retired. The two of them had fallen into an easy pattern of late-night conversation, finding a companionship in their shared status as outliers in the family-centered wagon train. Nate poked at the coals with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward into the dark. "I got my cabin," he said. "Built it myself 5 years back, up in the foothills where the grass runs good for cattle. It's not much, but it's mine. I run a small herd, hire on for drives when I need extra money, and otherwise keep to myself." "Sounds lonely," Magnolia observed, not unkindly. "Could say the same about traveling alone to California to start over," he countered, glancing at her with a slight smile. She returned the smile. "Touché, Mr. Garrett." "Nate," he corrected. "We're past formalities, I think." "Nate," she agreed. Then, after a moment, "You can call me Maggie. My mother used to call me that." "Maggie suits you better than Magnolia," he said thoughtfully. "Magnolia's all delicate and ornamental. Maggie's got strength to it." She felt something warm unfurl in her chest at that. When had anyone last seen her as strong rather than barren, broken, less than? The next day brought trouble. One of the wagons lost a wheel crossing a rocky stretch, and in the chaos of getting it repaired, Mrs. Henderson's youngest, a boy of about 4, wandered off. By the time anyone noticed, he'd been gone for perhaps 30 minutes, and panic rippled through the camp. Nate organized a search with calm efficiency, sending groups in different directions while he took the most difficult terrain himself. Magnolia joined a group led by Mr. Henderson, searching through brush and calling the boy's name until her voice grew hoarse. It was Nate who found him, of course, trapped on a ledge about 15 feet down a rocky gully, crying but mercifully unhurt. Magnolia arrived just in time to see Nate lowering himself down the cliff face with a rope, moving with careful precision despite the crumbling rock. He reached the boy, calmed him with quiet words, and secured him with the rope before signaling to the men above to pull them up. When both were safe at the top, Mrs. Henderson swept her son into her arms, weeping with relief. Mr. Henderson gripped Nate's hand with both of his own, offering profuse thanks that the cowboy waved away with evident embarrassment. But Magnolia saw something in Nate's face as he watched the reunion, such naked longing that it hurt to witness. She understood then. The thing he lacked, the emptiness he carried, was the same as hers, just arrived at by a different path. He'd had a child once, or had wanted one, and somehow that possibility had been taken from him. That night, she found him apart from the others, tending to his horse. The animal had picked up a stone in its shoe, and Nate was working it free with practiced hands. "That was a brave thing you did today," Magnolia said quietly. "Wasn't brave. Boy needed help, I was able to give it. Simple as that. Still," she moved closer, standing beside him as he set down the horse's hoof and straightened. "Nate, can I ask you something personal?" He stiffened slightly but nodded. "You had a child." "Didn't you?" In the moonlight, she saw his jaw tighten. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and she thought perhaps she'd overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice rough. "A daughter, Emma. She'd be about 7 now if—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Fever took her when she was 2. Took my wife Sarah a day later. I couldn't save either of them." "Oh, Nate." Magnolia reached out, touched his arm. "I'm so sorry." "Been 5 years," he said, as if that should have made it hurt less. "I thought coming out here, building something new, it would help. And it has, in ways. But there's still—" He gestured vaguely at his chest. "Still this hole that nothing fills." "I know about holes," Magnolia said softly. "Mine's just a different shape. 7 years married, and never once did I quicken. Not once. The midwife said there was nothing wrong she could see, that sometimes women just aren't meant to bear children. My husband tried to be kind about it, but I saw how he looked at me, how everyone looked at me, like I was defective, like I'd failed at the one thing women are supposed to do." "That's foolishness," Nate said with sudden vehemence. "You're not defective. You're not less than— You're—" He paused, searching for words. "You're whole exactly as you are, Maggie. Anyone who can't see that is a fool." She felt tears prick her eyes. "Then there are a lot of fools in the world. Won't disagree with you there." His voice softened. "But for what it's worth, I don't see you that way. I see a woman with courage enough to leave everything behind and start new. I see someone who's kind to folks even when they don't deserve it, who works hard and doesn't complain, who sits with an old cowboy by the fire and makes him feel a little less alone. That's worth more than—" He stopped, shook his head. "That's worth plenty." They stood together in companionable silence, two people bound by losses of different kinds, but perhaps not so different after all. Both childless, both alone, both trying to figure out how to live with the weight of unfulfilled longings. "Can I tell you something?" Nate said eventually. "Something I haven't told anyone?" "Of course. I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared of caring about anything again. After Sarah and Emma, I can't go through that again. It nearly broke me. So I keep to myself, keep moving, don't let anyone get close. But the thing is, that's breaking me too, just slower. I'm 36 years old and I feel half dead most days, just going through motions." Magnolia understood that too. "I left Thomas not because he was cruel," she said, "but because staying was killing something in me. Every month that passed without a child. Every pitying look, every neighbor's baby I had to smile at and congratulate when all I wanted to do was scream. It was like dying by inches. I had to leave or disappear completely. So what do? Nate asked, and there was something raw in his voice, something that made him sound young and lost. How do we live with these holes inside us? I don't know, Magnolia said honestly. But maybe we start by not living with them alone. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Not attraction exactly, though there was some of that too, but something deeper, recognition. The kind that comes when one wounded soul meets another and realizes they might survive better together than apart. My cabin, he said slowly. It's not much, like I said. 2 rooms, a sleeping loft, a stream nearby, good grazing land. I built it to be a home, but after I lost them, it's just been a place to sleep between cattle drives. But it could be more. With the right person, it could be a real home again. Magnolia's heart began to beat faster. What are you saying, Nate? I'm saying, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm saying California's a long way off and you don't know what you'll find there. I'm saying I have a place that needs a woman's touch and I could use the company. I'm saying maybe we could help each other. You could have a home, safety, someone to rely on. I could have, he gestured helplessly. Someone to live for again? That's not much of a proposal, Magnolia said, but her voice was gentle, almost teasing. No, it's not, Nate agreed. I'm not offering romance or grand passion. I'm not sure I have that in me anymore, but I'm offering partnership, respect, a chance at building something, even if it's not what either of us originally dreamed of. And if I can never give you children, she had to ask, had to know he understood what he was offering. Then we'll have each other, Nate said simply, and that'll be enough. Has to be enough because I can't carry another loss, Maggie. I truly can't. But I think maybe I could carry shared days, shared meals, someone to talk to by the fire. Someone who understands it wasn't a love story, not in the traditional sense. But standing there in the moonlight with this scarred, lonely man who saw her as whole rather than broken, Magnolia felt something shift inside her. Not the filling of the hole, she knew now that might never happen, but perhaps the realization that she could live with it. That survival wasn't the same as happiness, but it was a start. I'd need my own space sometimes, she said. My own corner to work on my sewing. I'm good with a needle, Nate. I could make money with it, contribute. There's a whole room you could have for that, he said quickly, and I'd help you set up however you need. Maybe we could even build on an addition if the business grew. I'd want to know that I could leave if it didn't work out. That you wouldn't... She paused, uncertain how to phrase it. I'd never hold you against your will, Nate said firmly. You'd be a partner, Maggie, not property. If you decided to leave, I'd give you money for passage wherever you wanted to go and wish you well. She studied his face, looking for deception or hidden motives, but found only sincerity. Why me? She asked finally. You could ask any of the women in this train, probably. Widow Morrison lost her husband last year, and she's looking for a new start. Bessie Thompson's husband drinks. I've heard her crying at night. Why ask the barren black woman who comes with nothing but her needle and thread? Nate stepped closer, close enough that she could see the weathering of sun and wind on his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the gray starting to thread through the sandy hair at his temples. Because you understand, he said quietly. Because you've hurt in ways that match mine. Because when you look at me, I don't see pity or expectation or judgment. I just see someone who's been through the fire and came out the other side still standing. That's what I want, Maggie. Not someone who'll try to replace what I lost or fix me or make me into something I'm not. Just someone who'll stand beside me and keep standing day after day. It was, Magnolia thought, possibly the most honest proposal any woman had ever received. I'd need time, she said, to think about it, to see your cabin, see what kind of life you're really offering. Of course, Nate agreed. Train's about 2 days from where we branch off toward my place. Come with me, stay for a few days. If you don't like it, I'll bring you back to the train or take you to the nearest town to catch a stage to California. No obligations, no pressure. Just a chance to see if maybe we could make something work. She should have said no. She should have continued west, should have stuck to her plan, should have maintained the independence she'd fought so hard to claim. But something in her recognized something in him, and for the first time since she'd left Kansas City, Magnolia felt not just the absence of pain, but the faint possibility of peace. "All right," she said. "I'll come see your cabin." His smile was like sunrise, slow and warming. "Thank you," he said simply. 2 days later, Magnolia said her goodbyes to the wagon train. Mrs. Henderson hugged her tightly, whispering that she hoped Magnolia found what she was looking for. Mr. Peterson shook her hand and told her she was welcome to rejoin them if things didn't work out. Widow Morrison gave her a knowing look that suggested she understood more than Magnolia had said aloud. And then she was riding beside Nate on a horse he'd acquired from a rancher friend, her few belongings packed on the mule, heading north into country that grew progressively more beautiful. The foothills rolled green and gold, dotted with oaks and crossed by clear streams. Cattle grazed in distant meadows, and the air smelled of grass and pine and possibility. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon, and Magnolia's first thought was that Nate had undersold it. Yes, it was small and rough-hewn, but it was solidly built, with a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. There was a covered porch where one could sit and watch the sunset, a small barn for animals, and a vegetable garden that had gone wild but showed signs of once being carefully tended. "Sarah planted that garden," Nate said quietly, seeing where she looked. "I haven't had the heart to keep it up properly, but if you wanted to revive it, I'd help." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. The main room held a table and chairs, a wood stove for cooking, shelves that held dishes and supplies. A door led to a small bedroom with a bed frame and a chest of drawers. A ladder went up to the sleeping loft. "I'd take the loft," Nate said quickly. "The bedroom would be yours. And this," he gestured to a door Magnolia hadn't noticed. "This was going to be a nursery. I never finished it after, but it has good light. Could make a fine sewing room." Magnolia opened the door and found a small space with a window facing east, where morning light would pour in, perfect for close work. The walls were bare wood, the floor unfinished, but she could see it. Her work table here, shelves for fabric there, a good chair by the window. "It's perfect," she said softly. They spent the next 3 days in careful negotiation of space and possibility. Nate showed her the property, the stream where they could get water, the places where deer came down in the evening, the spot where he planned to expand his cattle herd. Magnolia explored the cabin, taking stock of what was there and what was needed, making mental lists of how she'd organize things. They talked, long hours of conversation that ranged from practical matters to deeper truths. Nate told her about growing up in Georgia, leaving after the war, drifting west in search of something he couldn't name. She told him about growing up free in Philadelphia, meeting Thomas at a church social, the slow erosion of hope as month after month brought blood instead of babies. On the third evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Nate said, "I need to be honest with you about something." Magnolia tensed, waiting. "I can't promise I'll ever love you," he said. "Not the way Sarah loved me, not the way I loved her. That kind of love, I buried it with them. But I can promise I'll respect you, treat you kindly, be faithful to you. I can promise I'll work hard to make this place prosper so you never want for anything. I can promise I'll be your friend and your partner in all things. That's what I have to offer, Maggie. Is it enough?" She thought about Thomas, who'd said he loved her but looked at her with disappointment every time she bled. She thought about romantic love, that grand passion poets wrote about, and how it had never quite materialized in her life even when she'd been loved. She thought about partnership, respect, shared understanding, and how those things might be worth more than passion. "I can't promise I'll love you either," she said honestly. "But I can promise the same things you did. Respect, kindness, faithfulness, hard work. I can promise I'll make this cabin a home again, keep it clean and warm and filled with good cooking. I can promise I'll be your friend and support you in building your life here. And Nate, yes, maybe that is enough. Maybe that's all anyone can promise, really, and the rest is just luck." He reached over and took her hand, his palm calloused and warm against hers. "Then we have an accord?" "We have an accord," Magnolia agreed. They were married by a traveling preacher who came through the following week, a simple ceremony with 2 rancher neighbors as witnesses. Magnolia wore her best dress, and Nate put on a clean shirt and slicked back his hair. They spoke vows that promised partnership and companionship, carefully avoiding words like love and devotion. When the preacher declared them married and Nate kissed her cheek, it felt like sealing a business contract, but an honest one, and Magnolia felt more at peace than she had in years. The first months were about finding rhythms. Nate worked his cattle and taught Magnolia to ride and shoot, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself and the property when he was away on drives. Magnolia cleaned and organized, planted a new garden, and set up her sewing room. She'd brought fabric and thread from Kansas City, and she used the last of her money to order more supplies from the general store in the nearest town. Word spread that there was a skilled seamstress in the area, and soon Magnolia had customers. Ranch wives who needed dresses let out or taken in, mothers who wanted new clothes for growing children, even a few men who needed shirts and pants mended. She charged fair prices and did excellent work, and the money she earned gave her a sense of pride she hadn't felt since leaving her old life. At night, they'd sit together on the porch or by the fire talking about their days. Nate would tell her about calving season, problem cattle, negotiations with buyers. She'd share gossip from the customers, frustrations with difficult fabric, plans for expanding her business. They were, Magnolia realized, becoming friends in truth, not just in promise, but they were still 2 wounded people living parallel lives under one roof. Nate slept in the loft, Magnolia in the bedroom. They didn't touch beyond the occasional hand on a shoulder, brush of fingers passing dishes at meals. There was a wall between them, built of grief and caution, and neither seemed quite willing to try breaching it. Winter came early that year, snow falling heavy and thick. They were snowed in for weeks, trapped together in the close confines of the cabin. That could have been a disaster, but instead it became something else, a deepening. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but survive the cold, they talked more, shared more, let down guards more. One night, with wind howling outside and snow piling past the windows, Nate came down from the loft in the middle of the night. Magnolia, unable to sleep, was sitting by the fire with a quilt around her shoulders. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head, settling into the chair beside her. "Dreams," he said shortly. She knew about his dreams. Sometimes she heard him cry out in the loft, heard him pacing after nightmares. "The fever?" "Emma calling for me," he said, his voice tight. "In the dream I can hear her, but I can't find her. I search and search, but she's always just out of reach. Then I wake up and remember I never have to search for her again because I know exactly where she is." 6 feet under in a grave in Missouri, Magnolia reached out without thinking and took his hand. "Thomas wanted me to see doctors," she said. "Specialists who might be able to fix whatever was wrong with me. He said if I loved him, I'd at least try. So I tried. Let myself be examined and prodded, drank terrible tonics, followed absurd advice. One doctor suggested I tilt my hips up after relations. Another said I should pray more fervently. A third implied that perhaps God was punishing me for some sin I hadn't confessed." "That's barbaric," Nate said quietly. "It felt barbaric," she agreed. "But I kept trying because I thought if I could just fix myself, everything would be fine. Thomas would look at me with love again. I'd fit in with the other women. I'd be normal. It took me years to realize I wasn't broken. I was just me, and that had to be enough. I spent 2 years angry," Nate confessed. "After Sarah and Emma died. Angry at God, at the world, at myself for not being able to save them. Angry at other fathers who still had their children. Other men who still had their wives. I did things I'm not proud of. Got in fights, drank too much, said cruel things to people who didn't deserve it. I was trying to hurt the world back for hurting me. What changed? I almost died," he said simply. "Got thrown from a horse during a stampede, broke ribs, got pneumonia. Laid up in a boarding house for weeks, too weak to do anything but think. And I realized Sarah wouldn't have wanted this. Emma wouldn't have wanted me to destroy myself with rage. So I had to choose. Keep being angry and let it kill me or find some other way to live. So you built this place." "So I built this place," he confirmed. Thought hard work and solitude would be enough. And it was better than anger. But it still wasn't, he gestured vaguely. Wasn't living, not really. "And now?" Magnolia asked softly. He looked at her. firelight dancing across his face. "Now I have you, and that's something. That's more than I've had in 5 years." She squeezed his hand. "I have you, too. And this place. And my sewing. It's not what I thought my life would be, but maybe it's what my life needed to be." They sat together until the fire burned low. Hands joined, two scarred souls finding comfort in shared warmth. When Nate finally climbed back to the loft and Magnolia returned to her bed, something had shifted. The wall between them had developed a crack. Spring came eventually, as spring always does, and with it came new life. The garden sprouted green shoots, calves were born in the pasture, and Magnolia discovered she'd developed a strange fondness for this rough, beautiful land. She'd thought California was her destination, but here in Nate's cabin, between his sheets stitched with her careful mending, she found herself feeling blessed in ways she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, a rancher's wife named Martha came for a dress fitting. She was pregnant with her 4th child, and as Magnolia pinned fabric around her expanding belly, Martha said, "You know, everyone talks about how lucky Nate is to have found you." "Do they?" Magnolia said, mouth full of pins. "Oh, yes. They all thought he'd die alone up here, too broken to ever let anyone in. But you—" Martha smiled. "You've brought life back to this place. I saw him in town last week, and he was actually smiling and joking with folks. Haven't seen him do that since before. Well, since before." After Martha left, Magnolia stood in her sewing room, thinking about that. Had she brought life back? Or had she just been living her own life, and that had been enough to remind Nate how to live his? That evening, she cooked Nate's favorite meal, fried chicken, biscuits, greens from the garden. Over dinner, she said, "Martha thinks I've been good for you." Nate looked up from his plate. "Martha's right. Have I? Really?" "Maggie." He set down his fork. "When you came here, I was going through motions. Get up, feed animals, check fences, eat, sleep, repeat. I wasn't living. I was just not dying. But with you here, there's a reason to make sure the cabin's warm, a reason to bring home supplies, a reason to fix things and plan ahead. There's conversation and laughter and someone who cares if I come home at night. That's not nothing. That's everything." She felt tears prick her eyes. "You've been good for me too, given me a place where I'm valued for what I can do, not judged for what I can't. Given me partnership without pressure, companionship without demands. That's rare, Nate. That's precious." He stood, came around the table, and held out his hand. Magnolia took it, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, closer than they'd been since the wedding kiss. And she could see gold flecks in his eyes, could smell soap and leather and something uniquely him. "I know I said I couldn't promise to love you," Nate said quietly. "But Maggie, I think maybe I could. If you'd want that, if it wouldn't be too much to ask." Her heart beat faster. "What kind of love?" "The everyday kind," he said. "The kind built on respect and trust and shared work. The kind that grows slow but roots deep. Not the passionate romance of youth, but something steadier. Something that lasts." "I think," Magnolia said carefully, "that might be the best kind of love." He smiled, tentative and hopeful. "Can I kiss you?" "Really kiss you? Not just a peck on the cheek?" She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. It wasn't fireworks or earth-moving passion. It was warm and sweet and gentle, two careful people taking a careful chance. When they parted, both were smiling. "My bedroom," Magnolia said. "It's bigger than the loft. If you wanted, we're married, and if we're going to try this—" "Are you sure?" Nate asked. "I don't want to rush you. I don't want—" She put a finger to his lips. "I'm sure. Come to bed, Nate. Let's see what everyday love looks like between your sheets." That night, they came together with tenderness and care, learning each other's bodies, finding rhythms that worked for them. It wasn't about creating children. They'd both accepted that might never happen. It was about connection, about two people who'd been alone choosing to be alone together, about building intimacy from shared brokenness. Afterward, lying tangled in the quilts she'd mended, Nate said, "In my cabin, you'll be blessed between my sheets. That's what I told you back at the beginning. Did you ever think that it would mean this?" Magnolia finished. She traced a finger along his collarbone, marveling at how natural this felt, how right. No, I thought you meant practical things. Safety, shelter, security? I did mean those things, Nate said. But I think I meant this too, even if I didn't know it yet. Being blessed isn't just about material comfort. It's about finding peace after war, rest after running, home after wandering. Are we home then? She asked softly. He pulled her closer. We're getting there. The months that followed were a gradual unfurling, like a flower opening to sunlight after a long winter. They learned to be a couple, not just housemates. Learned to navigate disagreements with words instead of silence, to ask for what they needed instead of suffering quietly. They had their struggles, old wounds that still ached, moments when the weight of their shared losses felt too heavy to bear. But they had each other, and increasingly, that was enough. Magnolia's sewing business flourished. She hired a girl from town to help with simpler tasks, which freed her to take on more complex commissions. She made wedding dresses and burial shrouds, christening gowns and dance hall costumes, treating each piece with the same careful attention. The money she earned allowed them to expand the cabin, adding on a proper sewing room and a guest bedroom. Nate's cattle operation grew as well. He partnered with neighboring ranchers on drives, built his reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman. The small herd he'd started with doubled, then tripled. They began to prosper in a way neither had imagined possible. But prosperity brought its own challenges. Other ranchers' wives would visit Magnolia, and inevitably the conversation would turn to children. When are you and Nate going to start a family? They'd ask, meaning well but unknowing. Magnolia developed stock responses. We're content as we are, or these things happen in their own time, that deflected without revealing. One afternoon, a young woman named Rebecca came for a fitting. She was newly married, glowing with happiness, and she confided to Magnolia that she hoped to be pregnant soon. I want a whole house full of children, she said dreamily. At least 6, maybe 8. Magnolia smiled and murmured appropriate responses while pinning Rebecca's hem. But after the girl left, she found herself sitting in her sewing room, staring at nothing, feeling the old ache resurface. She'd thought she'd made peace with her childlessness, but moments like this reminded her that acceptance wasn't the same as not caring. Nate found her there an hour later, still sitting in the gathering dusk. Maggie, what's wrong? She told him about Rebecca, about the offhand comments and well-meaning questions that still stung. I thought I was past this, she said. I thought I'd accepted it and moved on. But sometimes it hits me all over again, this thing I'll never have, this experience I'll never know. And I feel, she struggled for words, diminished. Nate knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. You're not diminished. You're complete exactly as you are. But what if I'm not? The words burst out of her raw and pained. What if there's something fundamentally wrong with me? What if I'm defective in some way that means I can't? Stop. His voice was firm but gentle. Maggie, listen to me. I've known women who had a dozen children and were miserable, cruel people. I've known women who were barren who had more love and kindness in them than anyone I've ever met. Being able to bear children doesn't make you complete. It doesn't make you valuable. It doesn't make you worthy. You're worthy because you're you, because of how you treat people, how you work, how you love. That's what matters? Do you really believe that? She whispered, I do. With everything in me, I do. He squeezed her hands. And Maggie, if you want children in our lives, there are other ways. Orphaned children who need homes, children of neighbors who need looking after. We could, if you wanted, we could open our home to children who need family, even if they're not ours by blood. She looked at him with wonder. You'd do that? I'd consider it, he said carefully. Not to replace Emma, nothing could do that. But to give love to children who need it, to build something together that's bigger than just the two of us. If that would help fill the hole, then yes, I'd do that. Magnolia pulled him close, holding tight. Let me think about it, she said. Let me sit with the idea. But Nate, thank you for understanding, for not minimizing this. We understand each other's holes, he said simply. That's our gift. That summer, a family traveling west stopped at their cabin asking for water and a place to rest. The father was ill with fever and the mother was desperate. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ranging from about 3 to 8 years old. Magnolia and Nate took them in without hesitation. The father was put to bed, tended by Magnolia with the same herbal remedies she'd learned from other ranch wives. The mother rested while Nate and Maggie fed the children and kept them occupied. The littlest boy, Tommy, took to Magnolia immediately. He climbed into her lap that first evening and fell asleep there, trusting and innocent. She held him, feeling his small, warm weight, the puff of his breath against her neck, and something inside her shifted. This was what she'd been missing. Not pregnancy or birth, but this. The simple act of nurturing, of being needed, of giving love and comfort to a small person who needed it. The family stayed for a week while the father recovered. During that time, Magnolia discovered that she was good with children, patient and kind, able to soothe tantrums and answer endless questions. She taught the girl to sew simple stitches, helped the older boy with his letters, and cuddled Tommy when he missed his parents. Nate watched her with the children, and she saw something in his eyes. Not pain, as she'd expected, but a kind of bittersweet joy. One evening, with the children settled for the night and their parents resting, he said to her, "You're wonderful with them." "They're easy to love," she said. "I've been thinking about what I said before, about opening our home to children who need it." He paused, choosing words carefully. "There's an orphanage in Sacramento.